Hello, Legend of the Samurai here with a Goal 7-pin pin tumbler lock. This one is their Z series. And this lock is deceptively difficult to pick. So Goal is better known for their high pin count dimple locks like the V18 or the Grand V. And I had originally discounted the little pin tumblers as just generic, lower cost pin tumblers, but a friend of mine suggested that they had interestingly shaped security drivers and were hard to pick, and so I grabbed one, and lo and behold, they are very hard to pick. So it works just like a normal pin tumbler lock does. There's no extra bells and whistles, no sidebars, no side pins, nothing like that. But the way they are engineered, there are a lot of tricks, and if you don't know what you're looking for, they will trip you up. So, first thing to note is exactly how much play there is in the cylinder to begin with. And so there is a ball bearing detent that recenters the plug, but this much play suggests either deep spooling or something else. And another thing is if I apply tension and I go in and I find a pin, I can press up on it and I get nothing. And if I keep pressing up on it, I can let go of the tensioner and I still get nothing until I come back. And that suggests countermilling, which indeed it does have. So, in order to get this open, you have to deal with countermilling and then some. So, here we go. Start on pin 2. I have to back out of that countermilling, and then I get counter rotation, and then I get a third set. Now going on to pins 3, 4, and 5 simultaneously because the tolerances are so good that I have to work them all at the same time. So there's 3 out of the milling, and up into the counter rotation, and now I'm binding on it. Pop 4 up, but 3 dropped back. Pop 5 out of the milling and work them all up at the same time. Alright, that's 3, 4, and 5. 2 stayed set, so now I come up to 1. Back it out of the milling, and go back to 7. Back it out of the milling. Now 1 is binding again, and now 7 is binding again. Go back and forth, that's 1. 7, and now 6. Alright, so that's everything set out of the counter milling, but we're still not open because there's also over milling, and it makes everything act tapered. So now I just have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I just keep going back through. There we go. So we are open, and this one you can spin the plug, the drivers will pop in a little bit, lift them out, keep going for full circle. But now we get to take this apart, and I can show you exactly how cleverly this thing is put together. So this one, as an example of a Goal cylinder that if you want to make it guttable from the top, so they normally have these very tightly crimped in plates up here that have a lot of horizontal lines scored across them, and if you try to take those out, they will just come out in pieces, and you have to grind back this front cover to expose the front chamber, but it can be done. And then you can make a little brass cover strip because it is a little undercut channel that can slide into. So we have 7 chambers here. now we get into... So our key pins are all shaped like this, torpedoes, varying heights at the top. And our drivers are very, very deep spools with sharp tips. And some of them have progressively wider tips depending on the bitting height. All right, now take this apart. So they have a ball bearing that's actually almost pressed in there, right at the back. And then as you bring the plug forward, this one is set up very much like the Grand V, in that there are two ball bearing detents that are sprung outward. All right, so first off, the housing is pretty normal, very well machined. It has 2 little holes for those detents and 7 holes up top, but is otherwise pretty normal. The plug is where things get interesting. So, first we have those 2 ball-bearing detent holes, then we have a row of construction holes, but then we have, up top, overmilling. So this does not come back in on itself, and it's got a bit of a tapered bit here, which can cause the pins to act a little bit tapered as they slowly move up that to the edge. But then, if you can see, there's another bright margin under there, because there is very wide, deep countermilling in every single chamber. On both sides. To the point where you can actually hold the plug up with a pointed implement. And if you take one of these driver pins and you set it in there, it will lock into that countermilling about as well as an ASA gin spool will. And so you very much have to deal with multiple pins at a time because they like to bind at the same time. And then even further, the pins themselves are set up such that the distance between how far down the top edge of the driver sits, it puts all of them in the countermilling from the very beginning. So you start off in that false set, and if you lift up without counter-rotating, you will not get anywhere, because all of them are completely locked up. And then, as you get out of that, you have to counter-rotate to get past this wide spooled section, which brings the plug almost all the way back to neutral. And that will drop almost anything you've put past the countermilling, unless you're very, very precise on your tension. And so for this lock, I could set 2 up to the level of the overmilling. 3, 4, and 5 all have to be dealt with simultaneously. If I try to do them in any sequence at all, it will drop the other 2, setting 1 fully. After that, 1 and 7 have to be dealt with simultaneously. If you do one and then the other completely, it will always drop the other back. And finally, bit of a freebie on 6, which I could set completely without anything else dropping. And then you have to go through and do the overmilling, and you get almost no feedback through that entire process. Occasionally you'll get little tiny clicks, but if you press the tiniest bit too hard, this slightly beveled tip on the key pin will bring the plug back a little bit, and it will drop everything back to the bottom of the overmilling. And if you use heavy tension and you push even harder, you can actually bind on that tapered section, and you end up in an overset condition, which is not the most straightforward to detect at the very back of the keyway, specifically because the keyway, while there is actually space to work through it, you can get a 20 thousandths pick up through those holes, you do have to be pretty careful not to snag on any of that warding. And so it can be difficult to feel exactly where you are in the back of the lock. So this is the goal Z line 7 pin, and I believe this same countermilling, overmilling is used in the current models of the 6 pins as well, although I have not confirmed that with an actual lock. This one was purchased new, so I also don't know how old these locks can be and still have it, but at least the new versions are phenomenally well made, have very interesting drivers, and have both countermilling and overmilling, and all of it makes a difference. So I would very much recommend trying to find either the 6 pin, which is very common on the used market, or one of these 7 pins, which is considerably harder to find, but they are also, at least, from experience with this one, incredibly difficult to pick. I would put these right up there, at least this particular lock, right up there with an ASSA 700 in terms of a pin tumbler lock. All right, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.